Just going to give it a few seconds for some connections to kick in and for any last minute joiners. So just give it a sec. Okay, let's make a start. So welcome to today's webinar covering the essential preparations for navigating the e-invoice mandates. Today's webinar, we're going to start with some quick introductions. We're joined by Avalara. They're going to take us through some of the e-invoicing essentials. I'm going to tackle some of the challenges and look at sort of how to plan for your e-invoicing project. We'll have a solution overview from Avalara as well, which cover what they can do. And we'll finish off with some Q&A. You should see a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions that come up as you're watching the webinar, please submit those questions through the Q&A button and we'll take those at the end. Can we have the first slide, please, Ed? Right, so just introduce speakers today. So obviously you've got me, but Ed, maybe you can do a quick intro to yourself.
Sounds good. So hi, Adrian, and hi, everyone else on the webinar. My name's Ed Smith. I'm the Senior E-invoicing Solution Consultant at Avalara. My background is e-invoicing and EDI. I started off in professional services, worked into pre-sales. But I joined Avalara 2.5 years ago to help rebuild and re-platform our e-invoicing solution. And then I've moved back into solution consulting to assist our sales teams, partners, making sure that everyone's got the right fit with the solution and talk about e-invoicing. So I'll be going through the Avalara side today.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed. A little bit about me. I started out in indirect taxes in Australia, moved to the UK in 2001, was in consulting for a little bit. Before moving out into industry, had a couple of in-house roles doing sort of VAT advisory and compliance. Joined Ryan 16 years ago now, straight into tax technology. So left the orange books behind for the delights of IT. Okay, can we have the next slide, please, Ed? Rightio. So a little bit about sort of how we and Avalara work together. Ryan's a certified implementation partner of Avalara, so we've had training across a number of their solutions. We've worked on a number of projects together over the years, implementing various solutions. Our role in the project, we're sort of the glue, I guess. We work with Avalara across their various teams and the client to do the implementation, particularly if there's some sort of unique need or a particular challenge that the project has thrown up. And then, once we get to the end of the project, once the client goes live, we work with Avalara's support team to make sure that they have all of the information that they need in order to support the solution going forward. Next slide, please. So let's get into the e-invoicing mode now that you sort of know a little bit about us. Current state of play with the e-invoicing market. So you've probably seen that it's becoming more and more popular, from the perspective that more governments are starting to push it out. You'll get a bit of a picture in Ed's slides. I think he has a nice graphic that sort of shows how e-invoicing has really taken off. Obviously, you'll have seen things around Vita as well, which is, it's sort of feeding itself. E-invoicing is also becoming more standardized. I put an asterisk on that. It's becoming more standardized in its own way. We'll see some of the various models that governments are using to deploy e-invoicing. So yes, there are standards, but that doesn't mean they're all the same. As businesses are forced to look at it more, they're starting to discover that they actually already have some solutions in their landscape. They tended to have been sort of point solutions dealing with country or mandate at a time, or a couple of countries or a couple of mandates. So now that the mandates are coming thick and fast, people are sort of having to step back and have a look at what's in their landscape and figure out how they're going to deal with it. Are they going to consolidate? Are they, going to put something else in? How are they going to meet the current and future needs? One of the things that we're also seeing is that, e-invoicing is a little weird in that it's not really a tax project, but it tends to sort of end up with tax because of that tie back to the VAT invoice. Tax teams are finding that they're being asked to own it now. So with that sort of scene set, I'd like to turn over to Ed, who's going to take us through the e-invoicing side and expand on some of these points. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Adrian. So Avalara has an e-invoicing and live reporting tool, and the plan is today to talk you a bit through how that works, about the scene of e-invoicing. So going forward, just to explain who we are. So Avalara is a global indirect tax compliance company. We started back in 2004, and over the last 20 years, we've expanded from focusing on sales and use tax within the US to tax determination calculation around the world. And on top of that, we're expanding out into VAT reporting, e-invoicing, etc. We have 15 offices around the world, coming up towards 5,000 employees, and currently servicing over 41,000 customers in 75 countries. So from starting out in the US, it has expanded massively. Now, one of the ways that we do that is through our partner ecosystem. And this is where we work with the likes of Ryan to work with our clients to either meet their requirements, to make sure that they have the support that they need and the expertise that they need. We provide the technology, we provide the ways of working and being compliant, but there's often a lot more to it than just the technology behind the scenes. Now, as I've mentioned already, Avalara has a wide range of products here to support the entire indirect tax cycle, from identifying tax footprints, going through your registrations, doing your actual tax determination, whether that's your sales and use tax, VAT, customs duties, etc. Our focus today is going to be on e-invoicing, but there is also the returns and reporting piece as well, which, as we talk about a little bit, is actually becoming more and more involved in the e-invoicing cycle. So how do we get to an e-invoice? What is the difference between an invoice and just a digital PDF and an e-invoice? Now, when we're talking about e-invoicing, we're talking about the exchange of structured invoice data. Now, a PDF may look structured, but it can't be read easily by a computer. You need OCR technology, additional systems in place. And it often has a manual element around it, whether that's rekeying information, validating it, going through it again, when you're actually submitting it, whether you're doing that via email, whether you're sending that via post. And so the e-invoice is a structured format that goes from computer to computer. That is machine readable, and it has a lot of consistency behind it as well. So when we're talking about e-invoicing, we're largely talking about the structured format that we see on the right-hand side, usually an XML file, whether that's CII or UBL, which are essentially kind of approved standardized format that meet certain standards like the European Commission standard on e-invoicing. What we're now seeing is a move towards the hybrid model, which we've seen in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be one of the options in France. And that is where there is a PDF element, there is a nice visual element to it, but there is still the machine readable, that structured format behind the scenes embedded within it. So it can be sent and automated for that entire process, but you do still have the nice benefits of a visualization of that where you can look at it. Now, when we're talking about e-invoicing, as I'm sure you saw on that slide before, is we have an e-invoicing and live reporting tool. And there's a reason for this. There is a huge amount of crossover and gray area between e-invoicing and live reporting when tax authorities have been involved. In some cases, it's that you do e-invoicing on the B2B side, but you do e-reporting on your B2C transactions or your cross-border transactions. And so it really does depend on that country's requirements, but what we've done is created a solution that can handle both within the same way of working. The other thing to mention here is that while e-invoicing is a kind of process, when we're talking about e-invoicing or when customers are talking about it, it is largely where a tax authority has mandated that it needs to be done in a certain particular type of way. And that sort of leads us on to why are businesses needing an e-invoicing solution and why do they need it now rather than in the future? Now, historically, there have been hot pockets of e-invoicing. Latin America, it's been going on for quite a while now, and Italy introduced it back in 2014 in the EU, and it's expanded from there. And more countries are now bringing it on board where tax authorities are seeing the benefits of it. There tend to be two key driving factors behind the introduction of e-invoicing mandates. The first one is reducing the VAT gap and reducing fraud. And it has proven to be hugely efficient. If you look at Mexico, the way that they can blacklist businesses for dealing with cartel businesses that are like linked to the cartels, in Italy where they're able to reduce VAT fraud drastically, it has proven to be efficient in doing this. But the other side of that is actually digitalization of processes. Now, there are benefits to it, which we'll talk a bit about in a minute for the business, but the tax authorities are trying to digitize their process. The UK did it with making tax digital and did it in a slightly different way, but even they're now looking at e-invoicing as well. But more and more tax authorities are bringing this in. You can see on this list, this is just a quick basic list of what countries have already introduced it, what are doing this year, or have also already done this year. But as you can see, over the next 5 years, we have a huge amount of countries, especially within Europe, that are going to be introducing it. And they're all doing things slightly differently. Now, there is the VAT in the Digital Age program as well, which if you're not familiar with, is a package that's been put together by the European Commission, where it's proposing trying to make VAT easier when it comes around to single registrations, trying to actually deal with the platform economy and the way that that works across the EU. But the big bit that really affects this is the introduction of e-reporting for cross-border transactions across the EU. And also the fact that tax authorities won't have to get a derogation from the EU to introduce e-invoicing. So at the moment, there's a huge arduous process they have to go through. They have to get permission. They have to go through proposals on how they're doing it. Whereas that will be far easier to do. So even though that there is a huge list of countries on there coming in the next 5 years, that will expand as soon as VAT in the Digital Age comes in. So what I want to do is just highlight two countries that we're being asked about a lot and that seem to be at the forefront of everyone's minds. Now, Germany is coming in starting in January next year. Now, this is a slightly softer mandate. What they're trying to do here is set everything up in line with when the VAT in the Digital Age program comes into place. So what they've done is said that as of January 2025, they're getting rid of buyer consent for e-invoicing. So currently, if I want to send an e-invoice to a business, I would have to get their permission. We'd have to agree on our ways of working. But going forwards, if I want to send an e-invoice to you, you have to be able to process it as long as it meets the standards set out within the mandate, which is the EN 16931 standard. You'll hear a lot of talk about that, but essentially it's the European Commission's basically approved way. It means that it has to have certain data points within it. It meets certain requirements that actually make sure that it is a compliant invoice. There are two formats that are agreed upon to do that. One is the ex-rechnung file or X-invoice. That is largely used within the B2G space, but we are expecting some customers to be using that for B2B transactions. And then there's a Zuckford file, which is that nice hybrid PDF XML that we talked about earlier, that has the nice visual element, but also has the embedded XML. So the headache for businesses at the moment is that there is no guarantee that you will definitely receive an e-invoice as of January, but you have to be able to process it and have a way of dealing with that. Now, if you get the Zuckford file, it's not too bad. You've got a PDF, you can run it through your OCR technology today. There may be some risks involved in that with it scanning wrong, but you do also have that XML element within it that you can then automate that process. If you're to receive an X invoice and just get an XML file and go, yeah, that's my legal invoice, go and process that, you need to have a solution or a way of processing that data in an automated fashion. But it's not until 1st of January 2027 that businesses over 800,000 euros in turnover will actually have to start issuing e-invoices. And then from the 1st of January 28, everybody else. Now, there are some exempt transactions, things like ticket for under 250 euros on the invoice. So it's not going to be for every transaction out there, but for domestic B2B transactions, we're expecting this to be well used. From what we've spoken to customers, half of them are going down the route of, well, I only just want an AP solution and I want to be able to submit something in 2027, but we're going to carry on doing what we're doing today. The other half are going, well, we want to bring in everything in one go and automate the entire process and get those benefits out of it. The other thing to note here is that this is not the end state of e-invoicing in Germany. They have openly said that there will be some reporting coming in the future. And as I mentioned already, this is essentially setting everything up to be ready for the BAS digital age announcement, where we will then expect changes to come in place then. So when looking at a solution, deciding whether you're going to build something yourself or go with a provider, knowing that there will be changes coming and looking for someone that's going to keep up to date with that changes is very important. So the next one that I want to go through is France. France has been delayed repeatedly, where it's been pushed back massively from where we originally were going to have it introduced. Now, it is a rather complex mandate. Now, from the 1st of September 26, again, all companies must be able to receive e-invoices, and large and medium companies must issue e-invoices. And then there's also the reporting side as well, which is going to be for B2C transactions, etc. So that's why I said earlier that there is that kind of gray area between e-invoicing and e-reporting, or where they both go hand in hand. What France is introducing is what's technically called a decentralized CTC model, or continuous transaction control. I know Adrian's going to talk about the different models in a bit, but essentially this is more commonly called a 5-corner or 6-corner model. And what it is, it's a way of the tax authority having very clear visibility of the data that's going backwards and forwards, but at the same time not interfering with the sending and receiving of data. That's one of the things that the VIDA package is trying to combat. We've seen issues in Romania, etc., where the infrastructure may not be as robust. And so if you can only send it through a tax authority network, you can actually get in the way of that. How do businesses carry on? What's the impact on your economy if no one can actually send or receive an e-invoice? So this is one of the ways that they're doing it to get around it. But it is all-encompassing and, yeah, as I said, has both e-invoicing and e-reporting. So there is a huge amount to it. Now, when it comes around to the e-invoicing, you need to look either for what's called a PDP or a PPF, which essentially is an accredited provider to provide e-invoicing services within France. And there are a load of technical requirements that are specific that make it slightly challenging for e-invoicing service providers to get accredited. Avalara has actually had now its accreditation come through. So we are an approved PDP, no longer just within the candidate status as everyone else was before. But essentially, this is going to be a large shift in the way of working for businesses. It's going to be sending it through approved providers in certain ways. It's looking at your existing flows. Do you have everything set up to be able to do e-invoicing, and then onboarding your trading partners, even if maybe it is a cross-border transaction, you don't need to use it. Do you want to bring them on voluntarily? Yeah, so something to keep an eye on. We are expecting it to definitely happen in September 26 now. There is a pilot going on, so there are going to definitely be changes and things coming out of that from what they're finding. But considering how it went last time, we are expecting this date to stick this time. So I've spoken a lot about the tax authorities coming in, dictating to you that you've got to now do it in a particular type of way, and all for their benefit rather than yours. But there are a lot of benefits to using e-invoicing either voluntarily or that you can get out of it from introducing e-invoicing solutions. Now, Valentis have released a very good report on e-invoicing and the impact it has on your business. You can see here there are benefits in the sense of the cost savings. Now, the stat that they've got there, between 60 to 80% saving between a traditional paper invoice and e-invoicing. It's a lesser saving if you're doing it between like your PDF and an email, etc. but significant savings to be made. And actually within 6 to 18 months, you can normally find that you have paid back the cost of your e-invoicing solution. So it really is very quick to see the benefits of this. Outside of the actual cost, there are a lot of benefits in the sense of error reductions. You've no longer got people rekeying information. You can have it directly from computer to computer. You can set up rules and validations, and any good service provider is going to do that as part of the solution, so that they're able to fully automate that process, embed it within your ERP, billing systems, AP processes, etc. But reduce those human errors from people putting in the wrong information. I'm sure we've all heard at some point a story of someone that ordered 90,000 rather than 9,000 of a product or something. But there's also higher security. So I don't know if you heard, but it was in the news a while ago where someone had just been submitting invoices to, I think it was Meta or Facebook at the time, and made something like $60 million out of it because they just paid it without looking. Didn't actually need to send an invoice, nothing, no services involved, just he sent an invoice and they paid it. With e-invoicing, you can reduce that risk by the fact that you're going to have the likes of digital signatures or certificates to identify the businesses and make sure that it is who they say they are. So there are a lot of benefits. This is just a very small snapshot, but if you do want to look into this more, I'd definitely recommend the Valentis or the IDC e-invoicing reports. They have a lot of information out there. At which point I'm going to hand back over to Adrian to talk through some of the challenges of e-invoicing.
That's great. Thanks for that, Ed. So yeah, let's jump straight into some of the challenges. So what are the types of things we're facing? Well, you've probably garnered a lot of these from the presentation so far, in that, yes, there's standardization, but there isn't one global standard. It's one of these things also that's grown over time. So you probably do already have some things in your landscape, these point solutions, as we're referring to them as, but now it's that point of consolidation. But can what I have be flexed to cover what I need to cover? These point solutions, can they be expanded to cover everything that needs to be covered? Obviously, as Ed just showed us, the mandates are gaining momentum. There's essentially a race. The race is to comply in more places, at the same time or in quick succession. Each of those places has different requirements or different models. As you'll have realized by now as well, e-invoicing is a compliance obligation. Obligation carries cost. So when businesses are looking at costs, they're having to evaluate some of those choices around how they're going to meet the requirements efficiently and effectively. The benefits will certainly help to that, but at the end of the day, there is a hard currency cost to meeting this obligation. This lack of standardization that we keep coming back to, this essentially is making compliance more complex. Just like VAT, where we've got harmonization, which effectively means 20+ ways of doing things. We've now got that same sort of thing with the invoicing. It's not just the models, but it's also the content and what needs to go in them. So, as a result, businesses are faced with the challenges of saying, can I adapt what I have to be compliant with these obligations? Or can I implement something that's going to, cover what I have to cover today, but equally, not just cover what I've got to cover today, but something that's going to enable me to remain compliant. Ed mentioned, well, with Germany, they're setting the platform for Vita, and there are likely to be changes. So even if we implement something now, is it going to cover the future complexity? They're also looking at, well, is my approach going to be scalable? Not just looking at what we have today, but if the business expands, or if we go through a system upgrade. A lot of businesses out there are going through upgrades in their SAP landscape, for example. So can I easily make that switch? So those are just some of the challenges that we're seeing, or that we're seeing that our business partners are seeing. When we talk about models, Ed touched on a few of these before. I don't intend to go through each one of these models in detail, but basically it's sort of an evolution, and these models are continuing to evolve. You know, it's really boiling down to, you know, they're different. They're evolving and they're becoming more complex, but the question that they're really all looking to tackle, or the challenge that they're all looking to tackle, is who sends what to when, who sends what to who and when. But the other part of that challenge that Ed touched on before is, well, how do they sort of insert them, they being the authorities, how do they insert themselves into the equation without disrupting the business flow? Because that has implications for everybody. So yeah, the diagram shows it pretty clearly from the point of view of the more arrows you've got, the more complex that model is becoming. Can we go to the next slide, please, Ed? So if we want to sort of expand on that theme a bit, what's the impact on international companies? So if we look at the example we have on screen, the diagram there, I mean, this is what we've got. If we've got Hungary, Saudi Arabia, and Italy, you can see we have different models, different ways of getting information out. Now, if you take that sort of model, you look at some of the points that are laid out on the left. So, the fact that this is, if we're going to internally develop it, it's going to be costly. It's going to be difficult to maintain, points like that. But then flip back to that diagram and think, well, this is just one system. And this is just looking at our order to cash side. We've also got to look potentially at a mirror image of that diagram for how we receive e-invoices. You can quickly see that, the challenge that we're faced with is sort of a spider's web of what we would have to build if we're looking to build. And that it quickly becomes something that's not scalable. We can jump to the next slide. So what I guess the previous slide was talking to was leading to this question, which, because e-invoicing is a cost at the end of the day, I mean, if we're going to comply with this obligation, we have to incur money. Either we have to buy something that's going to let us do it, or we're going to have to use what we've got. So the first question, or one of the first questions that will probably come up is, well, why can't I do it in my ERP? It's a no-brainer, really. I mean, if somebody's got a choice of spending money or not spending money, they see, well, yeah, the ERP should be able to handle this. I guess some things that need to be considered here are, if you're operating on an older ERP, or even older versions of ERPs, they might not actually support all of the requirements. You might not have the skills in-house to build the connections, or you might have the skills to build the connections, but you might not have the resources to maintain the connections or to change the connections. You also need to consider, is it really all about the ERP? You could be looking at multiple ERPs. You could be looking at upstream or downstream systems as well. There's a high likelihood these days that it's going to be more than one system that you're worried about in terms of e-invoicing, both sending and receiving. Touched on it already, but what's the maintenance plan after go live? Not just from the point of view of looking at the business as we've got it today. If our business never grows, we still have to look at, well, what if the requirements change? What if somebody decides to change their model, or the content that's required on the invoice? But you also have to consider, well, even if I stay in my home market, if we buy another business, we've got to integrate their systems. We've got to integrate their e-invoicing needs as well. And if we want to expand, how do we move into new countries? If we've got a home-built system, there's a lot that we would then need to do to potentially build out to support that new country requirement. So it has a real impact on business strategy going forward as well. This decision that you're potentially making today about, can my ERP do it? So how do we plan for success? What do we want to look at for an e-invoicing project? First advice, and it's probably true of any IT project to be fair, is start early. There are lots of things that you can be doing that don't require an official project to have kicked off. So, you know, start with the requirements. You want to go around and catalog all of the processes that are resulting in invoices that are being issued or received. You need to figure out within those processes whether they're going to be relevant to e-invoicing. So, you know, you've seen already that you've got B2G only, you've got B2B, things like that. You might also be looking at a case of, well, do I, you know, it might not be mandatory to meet the requirement, but is it good from a business perspective to leverage that and be able to implement it and cater for it? When you're looking at these processes, one of the key things, and it's going to be the same for any sort of tax project that you're getting involved in, is, you know, that what I dubbed the biological interface, any sort of manual intervention in the process of issuing or receiving invoices. Understand really, you know, where the humans are getting involved. An extension to that point is understanding sort of, you know, if an invoice that we're about to issue is being changed or corrected, why is that being done? What is it that is causing us to say that what we get out of the system is wrong and needs fixing? Also have to consider our intercompany processes. These don't always follow the same processes as our sort of client-facing invoicing processes or vendor-facing. An extension to that is our good old sort of miscellaneous category, you know, our sundry or our one-time billing processes that are going on. You know, what do we need to do to make sure that we have all of the data elements on those processes as well as all of our normal invoicing processes? So for each of those processes that you document, you know, when it comes to cataloging this list, you want to understand, well, where is my data coming from? Is it coming from the system I'm connecting to? Is it coming from, you know, somewhere upstream? That leads on to the next point around master data. So, you know, who is responsible for collecting and maintaining that master data? You know, have we scrubbed our VAT registration numbers? Are they all valid? The last thing you want to be doing is switching on your e-invoicing platform and figuring out that a lot of my VAT registrations are out of date. You know, do we have the right names? Do we have the right addresses? Are the addresses laid out in such a way that, you know, the postcode is in the postcode field, that somebody hasn't decided to use address line 3 to record something that is not an address? Can we deal with some of those special places like Canary Islands, Northern Ireland, etc.? The other one to think about is your tax determination. This probably goes back to that manual intervention point. You know, we need to be able to make sure that our tax determination is right when an invoice goes out the door. The fact that it's an e-invoice just makes it all the more important. You know, you could even potentially use your e-invoicing mandates as support for a business case for getting your tax determination looked at. We see a lot of clients in legacy systems where they've got some logic that's been working for them or they think has been working for them. But as they're going around and looking at their processes, they're finding out about all of these manual intervention points. You know, those manual intervention points are involving people and their time for making those changes to the invoices. So these are all things that you can do ahead of any official project kicking off for e-invoicing. They're things you could start today. starting today is not going to invalidate any of your work, even if that work isn't being used for, 6, 8, 10, 12 months. Your billing processes are not likely to change as much. How you're issuing and receiving invoices, unless, of course, you're putting in e-invoicing. The piece when it comes to the project itself, because it is quite often sort of thrown over the fence to tax, you want to make sure that you've secured resources to help you actually test the implementation. Making sure that all of the processes are covered. So, how do I actually get the invoices in to test the process end to end? Okay, Ed, I think that was all on the planning side. If you want to jump to the next slide.
Brilliant. So this is where I'm going to go through basically Avalara solution and explain how we've created something to tackle the different requirements. So essentially, we have built a single global unified solution. Now, the way that we've done that is through building open APIs and trying to create a consistent way of working across the board. So there is a single endpoint to submit a document, regardless of what country it is. There is a single place to download it, a single place to check it. And by doing it through the open APIs, it's actually able to be embedded directly within the ERP or billing system itself. You can actually feed back into that process rather than the typical kind of EDI methodology of dumping a file over somewhere on an FTP server and then it going and being processed. The APIs are able to fully embed, checking the status, updating it, providing back unique IDs or QR codes or PDFs or whatever it is to be that's needed in that particular mandate. And I'm just going to use this as a good point just to bring up. So the IDC did a MarketScape report on e-invoicing, and Avalara last week was announced as one of the leaders within that category. And that is because of this vision of creating this unified single approach rather than having different solutions for different countries. And the way that we've done that is through creating this single workflow where you would connect from the ERP or AR system, billing system to Avalara using the REST API. Now, by doing it this way, we can be flexible, we can be system agnostic, we can connect to as many different systems as you need. But we are also pre-building connectors either ourselves or through partners directly into ERPs, or some ERP systems are actually embedding Avalara solution within it to provide the invoicing services. So everything from NetSuite, Oracle, SAP, Workday, etc., are all having these pre-built connections that then need to be configured. Where you would connect to us, essentially what happens in the middle is we have an XML file that is the payload for that data. And that's one of the ways we've made this scalable, is because we have this consistent way of working with a consistent XML file. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter what country, what the specific requirements are, it's invoice data. It's who's it from, who's it to, what are you selling, etc. And so we're able to take that, put it into a consistent way, but also expand it out to meet every country's specific requirements. And then Avalara is able to translate that into whatever format it needs to be, clearing that with the tax authority, sending it through a centralized network, or creating the compliant format in Germany. And we will connect out to those different networks, whether it's tax authority owned or whether it's some of the voluntary networks like PEPL or the DBNA, etc. And everything that is required to be compliant within that country, whether that's digital storage, encryption, digital signatures, is all included within the service. So all you need to do is worry about how to get the connection done between us. And that's where we have partners like Ryan to assist with that integration. And then we handle the rest of it. And that's the same on the inbound process as well, where we connect out to different networks, whether that's SDI in Italy or whether that's us as a service provider in France as a PDP receiving data, connecting out to PEPL, etc. We'll connect to those different networks, take all the different formats, and again, we translate it back into that consistent XML file format that is then able to be ingested into whatever system that may be. For some people, that's directly into the ERP through the API or through a connector. For some, that's into an AP processor, and that's where they do their reconciliation, three-way matching, etc. But it gives you that flexibility. And when you're looking for a solution, it's making sure that that meets your requirements and is able to actually embed within your solution itself. we're not trying to change your way of working. We're just trying to make sure that you're compliant with the different e-invoicing requirements around the world. So I appreciate we've got 5 minutes left. So I think at that point, it would be useful to go through the questions and recap. So I'll hand back over to Adrian for this.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I will do the recap quickly, just so we can tackle a question or two. Main point being, e-invoice isn't coming, it's here. You know, we've mentioned and harped on about standardization, but also, you know, revealing that it's becoming more complicated. You know, have a look at your, you know, the questions we mentioned about, you know, do we do it ourselves or get a solution to cover it? You know, the fact that businesses are increasingly turning to their tax teams to own this. So, you know, we've laid out a few points to consider when they say own it, but see if you can do it cheaply through your ERP. I mean, at the end of the day, it's in solution providers' interests to meet as many countries' requirements as possible, because, you know, this is what they do. It's their reason for being. And I guess the final point in recap is, you know, start your project before you need to. You know, even if you've, you know, if you've just been handed it, get going today, because there's a lot that you can do before there's an official project that kicks off. So yeah, with that, I guess we'll jump into some questions. Ed, I've just seen one in the chat. I think this might be one for you. Do you want to have a look at that one?
Yeah, that's fine. So the question is, in the slide about Germany, I believe you said they have a mandate to receive your invoices 1st January. While we aren't based in Germany, we have businesses with German vendors. So the mandate in Germany is for domestic transactions only, meaning that both parties would need to be registered and within Germany itself. Now, you could voluntarily use it. It could be that you may receive a PDF, which is the zip file from that business if they decide to go with that as their consistent process. But no, you don't have to comply with receiving the invoices from that date. You could decide to do it voluntarily and be able to process that as a way of driving those efficiencies that we talked about. But no, you wouldn't need to comply with the German mandate unless you have a VAT registration. It's actually a domestic transaction within Germany, which it doesn't sound like it is based on what you've said.
That's great. Thanks, Ed. Just looking, I think we've probably got time for a couple more. So if we have a solution in place, what do I need to do to add a new country? I can have a go at this one. I think what you need to do for a new country doesn't change a lot compared to what you're doing for Greenfield, but it's just a little easier, I guess. You know, you still need to do your stock take. You need to know which systems and processes you're going to have. You know, if you've already done one before, then hopefully they're the same. You've got all your connections there. Once you've got all the connections in place, then it's just a case of doing a fit gap. So what is it that is different about this new country's requirement? Now, this question will vary. I mean, where the question here is about us having a solution in place, you probably don't have to worry about the model because the solution is taking care of the model. You just have to look at the data side of things for that country's requirements. And then, well, you know, yeah, I guess, yeah, those are the main points. I mean, expansion is generally easier than a first implementation because you've already got the framework in place. Ed, I don't know if you got anything to add to that one.
No, I think it's just worth mentioning that the solution that we've provided here is designed to be able to easily scale up. When you've done that first integration, 80–90% of the work is done. It's then just looking at those additional data points. And the way that we've built it and licensed it, when you get access to our solution, you get access to every country that we cover. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I need to go and speak to my account manager and go and pay for a new license or whatever that may be. You get access to it. You can onboard yourself through the self-service portal. And then it's just looking at those data points, as Adrian mentioned, making sure that you have that across the place. And actually, where is it within the ERP?
Yeah. And I think I'm just skimming through the questions. It sounds like you've just covered one of the questions. Can your solution be scaled for rollout over multiple systems and countries? I think the short answer to that one's yes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's system agnostic and country agnostic, and yeah, we've built it to be easy to scale up as possible.
Yeah. Ed, there's a question in here about when are we expecting it in the UK? I know the consultation was just announced fairly recently. I don't know if you've heard anything further on the UK side.
So we've been involved in it for a while. So there's been some talks around e-invoicing in the UK, and Rachel has been looking at this for a while when she was part of the Shadow Cabinet. So there is no defined date. What I would say is a slightly kind of thing that to be aware of is that when VIDA comes in and there's going to be the reporting of cross-border transactions, Northern Ireland is included in that for anything going between Northern Ireland and the EU. So the UK will have to have something in place to comply with those requirements. Now, whether they then do that across the whole of the UK or whether they introduce that just for that single instance, not entirely sure at this point. But yeah, there is what they're calling the e-invoicing lab, and they're looking into the impact of it, what could actually be introduced within here. And I'd expect the timeline's likely to go in line with VIDA. But it's still very early on at these stages to be able to give a definitive when can we have it and when we'll see it and what will it be doing. We thought they were basically trying to counteract it by doing the making tax digital and focusing on the reporting side rather than e-invoicing. But e-invoicing has been around in the UK for a while. It is used within the NHS supply chain already, where if you want to supply the NHS, you have to go through PEPL. So it could be that that'd be something that they introduce across the board as well. So there's options, and yeah, I can't give you a definitive timeline, but we have been involved as part of that lab for a while. But now it's been officially announced, it's definitely going to be ramping up. So watch that space. There will definitely be more to come on what's going on there.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I think we're at time now. So first of all, I'd like to close by thanking Ed and Avalara for joining us today. Also to thank everybody for their attendance and questions. You should receive the slides on email with a link to the recording. So if you want to rewatch anything or share with your colleagues, please feel free to do so. If you have any follow-up questions, there are some contact details on screen. Mine and Tarek from Avalara will field those, so please feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.